Marcus Thompson had always prided himself on being prepared for anything, but nothing in his 12 years of military service had prepared him for what he witnessed that Tuesday morning in downtown Millbrook. The former sergeant was grabbing his usual coffee from Peterson's diner when the screaming started 3 blocks away, echoing off the brick buildings of their quiet Pennsylvania town like a siren call of chaos. At first, he assumed it was another traffic accident on Main Street. Perhaps someone had taken the turn by the courthouse too fast again, but the screams continued, multiplying and growing more desperate with each passing second. Elena Rodriguez, the town's newest emergency room physician, was sitting at the counter reviewing patient files when she heard it too, her trained instincts immediately recognizing the sound of genuine terror rather than mere surprise or anger. She exchanged a worried glance with Marcus, whom she'd met briefly at the hospital fundraiser last month, and both of them moved toward the diner's large front windows to peer down the street. What they saw defied all logic and medical understanding, causing Elena's coffee cup to slip from her fingers and shatter against the checkerboard linoleum floor. A woman in a torn business suit was stumbling down the sidewalk, her movements jerky and unnatural, while behind her, what appeared to be her elderly neighbor was pursuing her with a relentless, shambling gait that spoke of something fundamentally wrong with his motor functions. The pursuing man's clothes were stained with dark patches, and even from their distance, both Marcus and Elena could see that his skin had taken on a grayish, mottled appearance that suggested severe circulation problems or worse. The woman turned to look back at her pursuer, and her terrified expression revealed deep scratches along her neck and arms, wounds that were bleeding freely but didn't seem to slow her down due to pure adrenaline. Jake Mitchell, a 17-year-old high school senior who had been texting his girlfriend in the corner booth, looked up from his phone just in time to see the elderly man catch up to the woman and tackle her to the ground with surprising force for someone who appeared to be moving so awkwardly. The teenager's first instinct was to record the incident, thinking it might be some kind of drug-related episode he'd heard about on the news, but something about the scene made his hands shake as he tried to focus his camera. Rebecca Johnson, known to everyone as Becca, was walking her usual route to Millbrook Elementary where she taught 4th grade when she witnessed the attack from the opposite direction, and her teacher's instincts kicked in as she immediately looked around for children who might be traumatized by witnessing such violence. The 34-year-old educator had dealt with plenty of playground fights and family disputes, but the savage intensity of what she was watching made her stomach turn and her protective instincts flare. Tommy Anderson, who owned the auto repair shop on the corner, came running out of his garage with a wrench in his oil-stained hands, having heard the commotion and assuming someone needed help with their car, but he stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the elderly man biting down on the woman's shoulder with a ferocity that seemed inhuman. The mechanic's practical mind tried to process what he was seeing in terms of mechanics and logic, but the scene before him operated under no natural laws he understood, as the woman's struggles were growing weaker while her attacker seemed to gain strength from the contact. Marcus pushed through the diner's door first, his military training overriding his confusion as he moved toward the incident with Elena close behind, her medical bag already in hand despite the fact that she'd only intended to grab lunch between hospital shifts. Jake followed them out, still recording but now with the growing realization that whatever was happening wasn't something that would end up as a viral video but rather as evidence of something far more serious and disturbing. Becca approached from the school direction, her teacher's voice carrying clearly as she called out for people to stay back and keep children away from the area, while Tommy jogged over from his garage, the wrench still gripped tightly in his hand as his mind raced through possible explanations for behavior that seemed to belong in a horror movie rather than their peaceful small town. As the 5 strangers converged on the scene, none of them could have predicted that this single incident would mark the beginning of the end of the world as they knew it, or that their chance meeting would forge bonds stronger than family as they fought to survive against an enemy that had once been their neighbors, friends, and loved ones. Within 20 minutes of that first attack, Marcus realized they were dealing with something far beyond a single disturbed individual when the emergency radio in his truck began crackling with reports from across Millbrook that painted a terrifying picture of coordinated chaos. Elena had managed to sedate the attacking elderly man using a combination of her medical expertise and Marcus's physical restraint, but their relief was short-lived when they discovered that the sedative had no lasting effect, and worse yet, the bite victim was beginning to exhibit the same aggressive behavior and physical deterioration they'd witnessed in her attacker. Jake's phone buzzed constantly with panicked messages from classmates reporting similar incidents at the high school, the shopping center, and even the normally peaceful Riverside Park, each location adding another piece to a puzzle that depicted their entire town falling into an inexplicable nightmare. Becca found herself automatically shifting into crisis management mode, the same calm authority she used during school emergencies now directed toward evacuating nearby civilians, but she couldn't shake the growing dread that whatever was happening was spreading faster than any disease or chemical spill she'd ever heard about in safety training. Tommy's practical mind kept trying to find logical explanations, suggesting everything from contaminated water supplies to some kind of mass hysteria, but each new radio report and distant scream chipped away at his rational worldview until he was forced to accept that normal rules simply didn't apply anymore. The local police department, overwhelmed by simultaneous calls from every district in town, had dispatched Officer David Chin to their location, but when he arrived, his usual confident demeanor was replaced by barely controlled panic as he reported that his fellow officers were dealing with attacks throughout Millbrook, with some victims requiring multiple officers to subdue and others simply disappearing into the growing crowds of increasingly aggressive people. Elena noticed that the temperature readings she'd taken from both the attacker and victim showed significant drops in body temperature, along with slowed heart rates and dilated pupils that suggested severe neurological damage, yet somehow these individuals were moving with purpose and coordination that contradicted every medical principle she'd learned about brain death and motor function. Marcus organized the growing group of bystanders into a defensive perimeter around the immediate area, his military experience telling him that whatever was causing this phenomenon, they needed to maintain control of their immediate environment while gathering information about the broader situation. The afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings as more infected individuals began appearing on Main Street, their shambling gates and fixed stairs creating an atmosphere of surreal horror that made Jake question whether he was experiencing some kind of elaborate nightmare or psychological break from reality. Becca coordinated with nearby shop owners to secure buildings and account for missing persons, her teachers' organizational skills proving invaluable as they tried to maintain some semblance of order while the fabric of their community unraveled around them. Tommy used his mechanical expertise to disable several vehicles that had been abandoned in dangerous positions. Their drivers either fled or transformed into part of the growing crowd of infected individuals who seemed drawn to areas with human activity and noise. The local emergency broadcast system finally crackled to life with an official announcement that advised all citizens to remain indoors and await further instructions, but the message was cut short by sounds of struggle and what Elena's medical training told her were definitely not normal human vocalizations. Officer Chen attempted to radio for backup from the county sheriff's office, only to discover that similar reports were flooding in from neighboring towns, suggesting that whatever was happening in Millbrook was part of a much larger crisis that stretched far beyond their small community's borders. As evening approached, Marcus made the tactical decision that their current position in the middle of downtown was untenable, especially with infected individuals seemingly drawn to populated areas, and he began scouting potential fallback positions that could provide better defensibility and access to resources. Elena worked tirelessly to treat injured survivors who had managed to reach their group, but she was deeply troubled by the fact that anyone who had been bitten was showing signs of the same deterioration within hours, regardless of the size or severity of their wounds. Jake discovered that his phone's internet connection was sporadic at best, but when he could get online, social media was filled with similar reports from cities across the region, accompanied by increasingly desperate pleas for help and information that painted a picture of societal collapse happening in real time. Becca organized the civilians into small teams responsible for different tasks, from gathering supplies to maintaining watch schedules, her natural leadership abilities helping to keep panic at bay while they figured out their next move. Tommy worked on fortifying their temporary position using materials from nearby construction sites, but everyone understood that their current location was only a stopgap measure until they could find somewhere more secure to weather whatever storm had been unleashed upon their world. By nightfall, Marcus had identified the old Millbrook Community Center as their best option for a defensible position, its solid brick construction, limited entry points, an elevated position overlooking the main roads, making it strategically superior to anywhere else within reasonable distance of their current location. Elena supported the choice from a medical standpoint, knowing the building housed a well-stocked first aid station and had reliable backup generators that could power essential equipment, while the large gymnasium could accommodate the growing number of survivors who had gravitated toward their group throughout the chaotic afternoon. Jake used his knowledge of the building's layout from countless school events to guide them through the safest approach route, avoiding the main parking lot where several infected individuals had gathered, drawn by the automatic lights that flickered on as darkness fell across their transformed town. Becca coordinated the movement of their group, which had grown to include Mrs. Patterson, an elderly librarian who had witnessed an attack at the public library, along with brothers Mike and Danny Kowalski who had fled their gas station when infected customers began overwhelming their small business. Tommy brought up the rear of their convoy, using his truck to create a mobile barrier while Officer Chen maintained radio contact with any remaining law enforcement units, though responses were becoming increasingly sporadic and filled with static that suggested communication networks were failing throughout the region. The community center's front doors were secured with heavy chains, but Tommy's mechanical skills and Marcus's tactical knowledge combined to create an entry plan that involved accessing the building through the maintenance entrance on the north side, where overgrown landscaping provided natural concealment from the infected wandering the streets. Elena established a triage area in the center's medical room, grateful to find supplies that would allow her to treat the various injuries their group had sustained, while also setting up a quarantine space for anyone who might have been exposed to whatever pathogen or phenomenon was causing the transformation. Jake took responsibility for communication duties, using the center's PA system and his own technical knowledge to monitor emergency broadcasts and maintain contact with other survivor groups, though the news he gathered painted an increasingly grim picture of widespread collapse extending far beyond their regional area. Becca organized sleeping arrangements and resource distribution with the same systematic approach she used for field trips, ensuring that everyone understood their responsibilities while maintaining the kind of calm leadership that kept panic from taking hold among the civilians who looked to the group for guidance. Tommy and Marcus worked together to fortify the building's weak points, using furniture, equipment, and materials from the center's storage areas to reinforce windows and create defensive positions that would allow them to monitor approaching threats while maintaining secure firing positions if necessary. Officer Chen shared his tactical knowledge with the group, teaching basic self-defense techniques and explaining how to identify the behavioral patterns they'd observed in infected individuals, including their apparent attraction to noise and movement, their decreased sensitivity to pain, and their relentless pursuit of living humans. The community center's kitchen provided access to significant food stores, though Elena calculated that their current supplies would only last about a week with careful rationing, making it clear that they would need to venture out for additional resources despite the obvious dangers that awaited them beyond their fortified walls. As they settled in for their first night together, Jake discovered that his laptop could still access some internet resources through the center's Wi-Fi connection, allowing him to piece together reports suggesting that the phenomenon had spread across multiple states, with government response teams either overwhelmed or completely out of communication. Becca established watch schedules that paired experienced individuals like Marcus and Officer Chen with civilians like Mrs. Patterson and the Kowalski brothers, ensuring that everyone contributed to their collective security while learning essential survival skills from those with relevant backgrounds. Tommy rigged motion sensors using the center's security system, providing early warning for approaching threats while conserving their human resources for other essential tasks, though everyone understood that their electronic advantages would disappear once fuel for the generators ran out. Elena worked late into the night, cataloging their medical supplies and developing treatment protocols for the various challenges they were likely to face, from trauma care to infection control, while trying not to think about the implications of what she'd observed in the transformation process that seemed to rob people of their humanity while leaving their bodies functional but fundamentally changed. The group's first night together was marked by distant sounds of chaos echoing across Millbrook, punctuated by the occasional shambling figure passing by their darkened windows, reminders that their temporary safety existed within an increasingly dangerous world where the fundamental rules of civilization had been replaced by something far more primitive and terrifying, yet their diverse skills and growing unity offered hope that they might find a way to survive whatever challenges the coming days would bring. 3 days into their occupation of the community center, Marcus noticed disturbing changes in the infected behavior that suggested they were dealing with something far more dangerous than mindless zombies driven purely by hunger and instinct. Elena documented his observations with growing alarm as they watched groups of infected individuals moving with apparent coordination, using simple tools to test the building's defenses, and even positioning themselves in what appeared to be deliberate ambush formations around areas where survivors might be forced to venture for supplies. Jake's monitoring of emergency frequencies revealed that similar patterns were being reported by the few remaining government outposts, with military units describing infected groups that demonstrated pack hunting behaviors, crude problem-solving abilities, and most disturbingly, the capacity to learn from failed attacks and adapt their tactics accordingly. Officer Chen recognized the strategic implications immediately, explaining to the group that their defensive position would become increasingly untenable as the infected learned to exploit weaknesses in their fortifications, making it clear that passive survival was no longer a viable long-term strategy. Becca organized a planning session where the group confronted the harsh reality that waiting for rescue was likely futile, given the complete breakdown of communication with outside authorities and the evidence suggesting that the infection had spread far beyond any government's ability to contain or control. Tommy's practical mind embraced the tactical shift toward offensive operations, recognizing that his mechanical skills could be adapted to create weapons and tools specifically designed to neutralize infected threats while minimizing risk to their group members. Mrs. Patterson surprised everyone by volunteering for reconnaissance missions, explaining that her decades of quiet observation as a librarian had given her skills in moving unnoticed and gathering information, while her knowledge of Millbrook's layout made her invaluable for planning surgical strikes against infected concentrations. The Kowalski brothers contributed their experience with firearms and explosives from their military service, helping Marcus develop assault strategies that would allow them to clear specific areas of infected while establishing secure supply routes to essential resources throughout the town. Elena adapted her medical training to combat applications, learning to identify the most effective methods for permanently stopping infected individuals while developing field treatment protocols for injuries that their increasingly dangerous missions would inevitably produce. Jake used his technical abilities to create communication and surveillance equipment from the community center's electronics, establishing overwatch capabilities that would allow them to coordinate their hunting operations while maintaining contact with their base of operations. Their first organized hunt targeted the Millbrook grocery store, where infected had gathered in sufficient numbers to pose a significant threat while guarding resources essential for their long-term survival. Marcus led the assault team consisting of himself, Officer Chen, and Tommy, while Elena provided medical support and Becca coordinated communications from their mobile command post established in the center's parking lot. The mission revealed both the promise and peril of their new aggressive approach, as they successfully eliminated dozens of infected individuals but discovered that the creatures were capable of calling for reinforcements through vocalizations that attracted others from significant distances. Jake's electronic surveillance detected infected groups moving with apparent purpose toward their operation site, forcing the team to execute a hasty withdrawal that nearly cost Tommy his life when infected individuals demonstrated the ability to use environmental obstacles to trap and isolate individual humans. Elena's post-mission analysis of captured infected tissue samples revealed disturbing evidence of continued brain activity in regions associated with learning and memory, suggesting that the transformation process preserved enough cognitive function to support complex behaviors while eliminating inhibitions and social conditioning that normally prevented extreme violence. Officer Chen developed new tactical protocols based on their combat experience, emphasizing speed, overwhelming force, and immediate extraction to prevent the infected from adapting to their methods or organizing effective countermeasures. The psychological impact of their transition from survivors to hunters weighed heavily on everyone, particularly Becca and Mrs. Patterson, who struggled with the moral implications of systematically killing people who had once been their neighbors, friends, and community members. Tommy found grim satisfaction in the mechanical precision required for their operations, while Jake channeled his technical curiosity into developing better weapons and equipment for future missions. Marcus recognized that their success depended on maintaining the initiative against an enemy that grew more dangerous with each passing day, while Elena worked to preserve the humanity and ethical standards that distinguished them from the infected they hunted. Their evolving strategy required balancing aggressive action with careful resource management, as each mission consumed ammunition, equipment, and energy while exposing their group to risks that could eliminate experienced members whose skills were irreplaceable in their small community of survivors fighting to reclaim their world from an enemy that threatened not just their lives, but their very humanity. 2 weeks into their hunting operations, the community center's resources had dwindled to critical levels, creating tensions within the group that Marcus recognized as potentially more dangerous than any external threat they had faced from the infected hordes surrounding their fortified position. Elena's careful rationing of medical supplies had extended their reserves longer than expected, but the antibiotics were completely exhausted, and several group members were developing infections from minor wounds that would have been easily treatable under normal circumstances. Jake noticed that Mike Kowalski had been making frequent trips to the storage areas without reporting his activities, and when confronted, the former soldier claimed he was simply conducting inventory checks, though his defensive attitude suggested something more complicated was motivating his secretive behavior. Officer Chen discovered that someone had been accessing his ammunition cache during night watches, taking small amounts that might not be noticed immediately but represented a significant security breach that could compromise their defensive capabilities when they most needed reliable firepower. Becca tried to mediate growing disputes between group members over everything from food distribution to mission assignments, but her diplomatic skills were tested beyond their limits when Mrs. Patterson accused Danny Kowalski of hoarding medicine that could have saved another survivor who had died from an infected bite wound. Tommy's mechanical expertise became a source of conflict when he refused to share certain tools and spare parts with other group members, arguing that his specialized knowledge made him the only person qualified to maintain their critical equipment and vehicles. The breaking point came when Elena discovered that Mike Kowalski had been secretly negotiating with a group of armed survivors who had taken control of the shopping center on the outskirts of town, offering information about their defenses and supply levels in exchange for guaranteed passage out of Millbrook for himself and his brother. Marcus confronted Mike about the betrayal during what should have been a routine planning meeting, but the situation escalated rapidly when Mike pulled a concealed weapon and demanded that the group vote on whether to abandon their current position and join the shopping center group under terms that would essentially make them indentured servants. Jake attempted to defuse the situation by suggesting they could negotiate better terms with the shopping center survivors, but Elena pointed out that Mike's actions had already compromised their security and potentially exposed them to attack from people who now knew their exact numbers, weapons, and vulnerabilities. Officer Chen moved to disarm Mike, but Danny Kowalski intervened to protect his brother, creating a three-way standoff that threatened to tear their carefully constructed group apart at the moment when unity was most essential for their survival. Becca pleaded with both brothers to consider the consequences of their actions, reminding them that everyone in the group had invested their trust and lives in their collective security, but Mike responded by revealing that he had already provided detailed information about their patrol schedules and defensive weak points to the shopping center group's leaders. Mrs. Patterson, whose quiet presence had been a stabilizing influence throughout their ordeal, surprised everyone by producing a small pistol and calmly explaining that she could not allow Mike's betrayal to endanger the people who had become her surrogate family in this transformed world. Tommy supported Mrs. Patterson's position while Elena tried to find a medical solution that might resolve the crisis without violence, but the situation deteriorated rapidly when infected individuals began gathering outside their perimeter, apparently drawn by the raised voices and emotional tension emanating from within the community center. Marcus made the tactical decision that Mike's betrayal represented an unacceptable security risk, but before he could act, Danny Kowalski made a desperate attempt to escape with his brother, triggering a brief but violent confrontation that ended with Danny wounded and Mike fleeing into the night with critical information about their operations. Jake used his technical equipment to track Mike's movement through the abandoned streets, but lost the signal when the traitor reached the shopping center area, confirming their worst fears about the information that was now in enemy hands. Elena worked frantically to save Danny's life despite his participation in the betrayal, while Officer Chen organized immediate defensive preparations for the attack that seemed inevitable now that their enemies possessed detailed intelligence about their capabilities and vulnerabilities. Becca struggled with the moral implications of their actions, questioning whether they had become no better than the infected in their willingness to use violence against former allies, while Mrs. Patterson quietly cleaned her weapon and prepared for whatever consequences their fractured trust would bring. The group's first major internal crisis had cost them not only valuable resources and information, but also their faith in each other's loyalty, leaving them weaker and more vulnerable at precisely the moment when external threats were growing more sophisticated and dangerous, forcing them to confront the possibility that survival might require sacrifices that would fundamentally change who they were as human beings. Marcus had barely 3 hours to prepare for the coordinated assault that Jake's surveillance equipment detected approaching from multiple directions, with the shopping center survivors moving in tactical formation while driving infected hordes ahead of them like a living weapon designed to overwhelm the community center's defenses. Elena worked frantically to prepare the medical station for mass casualties, knowing that their final battle would likely push their group beyond anything they had experienced during their gradual transformation from scared civilians into hardened survivors. Officer Chen distributed the remaining ammunition according to each person's demonstrated skill level, while Tommy completed last-minute modifications to their defensive barriers using every piece of mechanical knowledge he had gained during their weeks of adaptation to this hostile new world. Becca organized the civilians into support roles that would maximize their contribution to the group's survival, assigning Mrs. Patterson to coordinate communications and supply distribution while Danny Kowalski, still recovering from his wounds, provided intelligence about his brother's likely tactics and the shopping center group's capabilities. Jake's electronic monitoring revealed that their attackers had somehow learned to coordinate with the infected, using noise and movement to direct the zombie hordes towards specific sections of their perimeter while human gunmen prepared to exploit any breaches in their fortifications. The first wave struck at dawn, with infected individuals streaming across the community center's grounds in numbers that exceeded anything they had previously encountered, their relentless advance supported by sniper fire from shopping center survivors positioned in buildings throughout the surrounding neighborhood. Elena found herself treating wounds while simultaneously engaging infected that broke through their defensive lines, her medical training allowing her to identify vital targets on attacking zombies while maintaining the steady hands needed for emergency surgery under combat conditions. Tommy's mechanical traps and automated defenses bought them precious time during the initial assault, but the sheer number of attackers began overwhelming their carefully prepared positions as infected individuals climbed over the bodies of their fallen predecessors with inexorable determination. Marcus coordinated their defensive efforts with the calm precision of his military background, directing fire teams and tactical retreats while maintaining the overall strategic coherence that prevented their resistance from collapsing into panicked chaos. Officer Chen held the main entrance against a concentrated assault by shopping center survivors who had expected to find the community center weakened by internal divisions, but instead encountered coordinated resistance that demonstrated how their shared hardships had forged genuine unity among the remaining group members. Becca's organizational skills proved invaluable as she managed ammunition distribution and casualty evacuation, moving through the combat zone with calm efficiency that inspired everyone around her to maintain focus despite the overwhelming odds they faced. Mrs. Patterson surprised even herself by demonstrating remarkable accuracy with her small pistol, methodically eliminating infected individuals who threatened wounded group members, while Danny Kowalski redeemed himself by providing crucial intelligence about the shopping center group's attack patterns and leadership structure. Jake's technical expertise enabled them to maintain communications and surveillance throughout the battle, allowing Marcus to anticipate enemy movements and coordinate counterattacks that turned potential disasters into tactical victories. The tide of battle shifted dramatically when Tommy's improvised explosive devices successfully collapsed a section of burning building onto a concentration of shopping center vehicles, eliminating their mobility advantage and forcing them to fight on equal terms with defenders who knew every inch of their terrain. Elena's combat medicine kept wounded defenders in the fight longer than their attackers anticipated, while her knowledge of infected physiology allowed her to identify the most effective methods for stopping zombie attacks with minimal expenditure of precious ammunition. As the sun reached its zenith, Marcus recognized that their ammunition was nearly exhausted, but their attackers had also suffered heavy casualties and were beginning to show signs of coordination breakdown as their leadership structure crumbled under defensive pressure. Officer Chen led a desperate counterattack that broke the siege by targeting the shopping center group's command post, while Becca coordinated a fighting withdrawal that allowed them to consolidate their remaining resources for what everyone understood would be the final phase of their ultimate test. The afternoon brought wave after wave of infected attackers, but the group's evolved tactics and unbreakable trust in each other enabled them to hold their ground until the assault finally exhausted itself against their determined resistance. Tommy's mechanical genius, Elena's medical expertise, Jake's technical skills, Becca's organizational leadership, Mrs. Patterson's unexpected courage, Officer Chen's tactical knowledge, and Marcus's strategic command had combined into something greater than the sum of their individual contributions. As evening shadows lengthened across the battlefield littered with infected corpses and abandoned equipment, the survivors realized they had not merely survived their greatest challenge, but had proven that human cooperation and determination could triumph over any threat that sought to destroy their hard-won community and the hope it represented for rebuilding civilization. 3 months after their victory at the community center, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the renovated Millbrook water treatment plant, watching the sun rise over a town that bore little resemblance to the peaceful community he had once called home, yet somehow felt more genuinely alive than it ever had before the outbreak transformed their world forever. Elena had established a fully functional medical clinic in the plant's former administrative building, treating not only their core group but also the steady stream of survivors who continued to arrive from distant communities, drawn by radio broadcasts that Jake transmitted daily to announce their growing settlement's willingness to accept anyone committed to rebuilding civilization based on cooperation rather than exploitation. Officer Chen served as their security coordinator, training new arrivals in defensive tactics while organizing patrol schedules that kept their expanding territory clear of infected stragglers, though the zombie threat had diminished significantly as winter weather and natural decay reduced the undead population to manageable levels. Becca had transformed the plant's maintenance facility into a school where children from various survivor groups learned not only traditional academic subjects, but also practical skills like farming, construction, and conflict resolution that would be essential for creating a sustainable community in their transformed world. Tommy's mechanical expertise had become the foundation of their infrastructure development, as he led teams of survivors in restoring power systems, water purification equipment, and communication networks that connected their settlement with other survivor communities throughout the region. Mrs. Patterson, whose courage during the final battle had earned universal respect, now served as their community historian and mediator, documenting their experiences while helping resolve disputes between groups with different backgrounds and survival philosophies. Danny Kowalski had worked tirelessly to atone for his brother's betrayal, becoming one of their most dedicated patrol leaders and earning the trust of people who had initially viewed him with suspicion because of his family connection to Mike's treachery. Jake's technical skills had evolved far beyond simple communication and surveillance, as he developed innovative solutions for everything from renewable energy generation to automated defense systems that protected their growing agricultural areas from the occasional infected incursion. The settlement's success had attracted attention from government remnants attempting to re-establish federal authority, but Marcus and the council they had formed decided to maintain their independence while cooperating with official reconstruction efforts that respected their community's autonomy and democratic decision-making processes. Elena's medical research had contributed valuable insights into the infection process, helping other survivor communities develop better treatment protocols for bite victims and prevention strategies that reduced transmission rates in areas where infected populations remained active. Their agricultural program, supervised by new arrivals with farming experience, had achieved food security that allowed them to support nearly 200 residents while maintaining surplus production for trade with neighboring settlements that specialized in different aspects of post-apocalyptic reconstruction. Officer Chen's security training had created a network of allied communities throughout their region, connected by radio communications and mutual defense agreements that provided collective protection against both zombie threats and hostile human groups that continued to operate in lawless areas. Becca's educational initiatives had attracted families from hundreds of miles away, as parents recognized that their children's future depended on communities capable of preserving knowledge and cultural values while adapting to the realities of their transformed world. Tommy's engineering projects had restored infrastructure connections that enabled trade and communication across distances that had seemed impossible during the chaotic early months following the outbreak, when isolated survivor groups had struggled merely to find enough food and ammunition to survive each day. Mrs. Patterson's historical documentation had become a valuable resource for other communities attempting to understand how successful settlements had emerged from the chaos, while her mediation skills had prevented internal conflicts that might have destroyed their hard-won unity. The morning radio broadcast that Jake prepared each day now included reports from dozens of allied settlements, creating a network of cooperation that stretched across state boundaries and represented the first signs of genuine civilization emerging from the ruins of the old world. As Marcus watched the sunrise illuminate solar panels that Tommy had installed to power Elena's medical equipment, while Becca led a group of children in their morning exercises and Mrs. Patterson prepared for another day of welcoming new arrivals, he reflected on how their community had become living proof that humanity's greatest strength lay not in individual survival, but in the willingness to trust, sacrifice, and build together, transforming even the darkest crisis into an opportunity for creating something better than what had existed before.